Okay. So let's get this webinar underway. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. On behalf of the Civic Advisory Hub, I take the singular honor of welcoming you to this edition of the Leaders Talk, where we are going to focus on a very interesting topic, a topic that I would urge everyone to be keenly interested in, because we are talking about curbing illicit financial flows arising from illegal natural resources and gaps within the tax system. We will then look at the collaborative strategies to end Africa's aid dependency. And when we talk about natural resources, you know, we come from a continent in Africa that God has gifted with almost everything, but we have been cast by greed, and therefore that then justifies why this webinar is of critical importance. So let me introduce the panelists we have on this webinar. With me, I have two distinguished sons and daughters of the soil. But let me start with the lady, Miss Chenai Mukumba. Miss Chenai Mukumba is the executive director. If you can, Chenai, if you can turn on your video, please. Is the executive director of the Tax Justice Network Africa, TJNA. She's based in Nairobi, Kenya, and overall provides strategic leadership and direction to deliver on TJNA's mission and vision in its various thematic areas. Chennai has a master's in international relations from Wits University, Johannesburg, and a master's degree in taxation from the prestigious University of Oxford, Chennai. Welcome to the webinar. It's a pleasure to have you. Can I have video on? Chennai, if you can put your video on. And of course, as she does that, let me introduce the gentleman on the panel, Miss Mkululi Nkosilamandla Kube, who is the programs, that's not an easy one to pronounce. He's the programs officer at the African Minerals Development Center, AMDC, which is a specialized agency of the African Union. So in this role, he provides strategic operations support and coordination for the implementation of the Africa Mining Vision and its action plan, as well as the solid minerals segment of the Africa Commodity Strategy. These are quite interesting ones. So those are the two panelists we have that are going to be, guiding us through this very important subject. And without much ado, allow me to kick it off by inviting the man himself who sits at the helm of the Civic Advisory Hub, Yona Wanjala, to give us opening remarks. And then thereafter, we will get the bus off the stage. Yona, welcome, and let's hear your opening remarks.
Great. Henry, thank you for that humbling welcome, not only to me, but also to our panelists. Today, we are blessed and honored to have the fine brains on African continent on the subject matter of curbing illicit financial flows. Colleagues on this virtual platform, you're welcome. And thank you for honoring our invitation always to join us in our webinar series. We feel for us to have African solutions for African problems, we should be interacting as leaders of the land. So this, the Leaders Talk webinar series, is a platform that is basically created or an initiative of the Civic Advisory Hub to bring subject matter experts to share their knowledge and experience, to share what we can run away with and implement at our own, in our own jurisdiction. And basically, that's what we are handling today. Colleagues today and colleagues on this virtual platform, I know you know what is going on in the world, where there is big disruption when it comes to funding. And Africa, a continent that is gifted with natural resources, is swimming into a lot of financial challenges. What an irony. You have a lot of resources that the rest of the world are looking for, but you are not able to utilize them. And one of the biggest challenges that is facing the continent is illicit financial flows. Money is leaving our continent, going to the rest of the world. Efforts have been done by governments. Efforts have been done by regional bodies. But I think more needs to be done. And today we are honored again. Ms. Chennai, you're welcome. And my brother Nkube Mkluli, you're welcome. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but to just thank you that we at the Civic Advisory Hub, we're here to share and bring experts to share their knowledge and bridge the knowledge gap when it comes to issues in our context, but also in issues that affect our civic space. Thank you, and I declare this webinar open. Over to you, Comrade Henry.
Thank you very much, Yona. And as I understand on this on this webinar, majority of the participants are NGO leaders. And as you know, one of the deficits we are grappling with in Africa is the deficit of leadership. And for the longest of time, NGO leaders have sat on the bench, on the fence. And therefore, as we navigate through this webinar, I am certain that the insights the subject matter experts are going to share with us will go a long way in catapulting us to quickly rise and fill that gap where needs be. And so without much ado, how we are going to do it is that I am going to invite, start with Ms. Chennai. Chennai, I don't know if you are ready. So you will share with us your take on the subject.
Henry, just for Miss Chennai is still sorting out some issue with the internet. Maybe you give the first shot to Mkululi.
Okay. So thank you very much for that guidance, Yona. Let's go to my brother Mkululi, who is going to share with us about his experiences, but also his take on the subject. Aware that we want him to emphasize on what exactly we can do, what role we as leaders of NGOs in Africa can play in ensuring that this matter that has drained resources in Africa, a continent where citizens are seated on gold, but up here are dressed in rags. Like, what an irony. What role can we play in a situation where those that have interested with leadership seem to be misleading? Over to you, Kululi, for your submission on the subject matter and guidance on what role we can play as leaders of NGOs in Africa. Have your say, sir.
Thank you, Henry. And thank you to the Civic Advisory Hub for having me. More importantly, I thank them for letting me speak freely. Had I been giving a PowerPoint presentation, I would not have been as free as I'm going to be. As much as I am seen as a subject matter expert, I have been taught the past few years that no one is fully an expert on anything as long as you have something to learn every day. And we all know that every day is a learning process. So for me, I only intend on imparting the knowledge that I have in a manner that I'm hoping civic society leaders that are here, or even if they are not leaders, everyone is a leader in one way or the other. Coming from the perspective of our own developmental framework called the Africa Mining Vision. So I'll start again with my name is Ululi Nkosilamandla Ncube. I am the programs officer at the African Minerals Development Center, as Henry rightfully put it, the specialized agency of the African Union that is tasked with implementing and collaborating or coordinating the collaboration of the Africa Mining Vision and its action plan. The Africa Mining Vision, in short, is the developmental framework of the continent that looks at the whole mining value chain from exploration all the way to mine closure, but in all that ensuring that the continent actually does benefit from the resources that are actually being exploited within the whole mining value chain. So you may notice I said resources, not minerals. Human resources are exploited along the way. Financial resources, of course, are exploited along the way. And of course, the mineral resources themselves. So the whole value chain then comes in to play by ensuring that when you say human resources or human technical capacity is exploited, we're now talking of manufacturing, we're now talking of industry. When we speak to human resources, we're speaking to capacity building, we're speaking to issues of capacitating our own human resources to ensure that these resources are extracted in a sustainable manner for the benefit of the communities that they're coming from, as well as the greater good. So it then becomes an issue of becoming more than just mining. And that's what we always say about the Africa Mining Vision. It is not, the name is deceptive because a lot of people think it is about mining. But the AMV is a developmental framework for the continent that speaks to harnessing the mineral resources for the benefit of the continent and its people. So, that being the introduction of what the AMV is, I can speak to what the AMV has as part of its action plan. Here we're talking about, like I said, from the whole value chain. We're talking from the geological and mineral exploration, the mining regimes or the mineral development regimes or legislation, policies or frameworks that are meant to actually help in the extraction of minerals. And then we speak to the value addition, which is the key part of ensuring that we actually benefit from the resources that we have, the value addition vis-a-vis beneficiation. And we now have a new term that we are going to be using thanks to the meeting we had yesterday with the Minister of Mineral Resources here in Sierra Leone yesterday. We are beyond the need to value add. It's now supposed to be value multiplication. A good quip on the fact that we have been speaking to issues of value addition even before the Africa Mining Vision was there. Africa Mining Vision only encapsulated the need to ensure that we have a developmental framework program, action plan that works towards value addition and beyond. But now we're speaking to value multiplication because, as everyone has noticed and as mentioned by Henry, the issues that are now going to come up because of the current geopolitical scenarios that we should not be worried about, but we are, because I'll give an example, a very simplified example, after I speak to this. We are not supposed to be worrying about what is happening in the rest of the geopolitical world or geopolitical tensions, because we ourselves are supposed to be a major geopolitical player in terms of creating and maintaining our own dignity. What I'm going to give as an example here may seem simplified, but I think it will help my life in terms of explaining the work that we're doing at the AMTC. What we are experiencing and what we have been experiencing over the years is not different to a group of wheat farmers, 55 wheat farmers that have no way of turning the wheat into bread. Right. The closest thing they can do is probably, as usual, in a rudimentary manner, crush the wheat into flour. But once it is in flour form, only one or two of them have the ability to actually turn it to dough. And that dough will not necessarily be bread, but be made into fat cooks. Right. No one can make cake. No one has an idea of how to make cake. No one has an idea, not that the cake is the best thing for our health either, but no one has an idea of how to make cake. We don't have the option to do that. No one has the capacity to make bread. But we are always being told, with all this wheat, why are you always running hungry? So that is the scenario that we have on the continent. But of course, the Africa Mining Vision then says, let us ensure that we create bakeries. Bakeries are expensive to set up. So let us not do it on an individual basis. Let's not have 55 bakeries, right? Let us ensure that we speak from one corner of the village to say that corner of the village is a bakery, another corner of the village is a bakery. Let's take it as a rectangular village. 4 corners of the village have bakeries. That households along those corners are putting resources together to create bakeries. Those would be the value addition processes, not just for the people, not just the refineries, but we're talking about the whole value chain scenario. You have the ones that will pound the wheat into flour. We have those that know how to turn the flour into cake flour. We have those that, with their ability to turn that flour into powder, also have the equipment to speak to others who know how to crystallize sugarcane into sugar. And at the end of the day, we have bakeries that are aligned along the value chain to ensure that we have bread, we have cakes, we have scones, we are not hungry. And the knowledge that we have in adding value to flour, right, will help us add value to maize meal, to cornmeal. Once you are able to crush cornmeal, you realize that even before you crush cornmeal, you can make corn oil, right? Then you have a whole lot of downstream value addition processes that align to more than just bread, but they will start from the ability to make bread because we have that much wheat, right? So from a minerals development perspective, what we are saying is, if we're going to add value to, let us say, because of the geopolitical tensions at the moment, to lithium. Not every country has the capacity to set up a lithium refinery all the way to lithium carbonate and hydroxide, beyond lithium hydroxide and lithium carbonate, right? You then still need to be part of the value chain and add it all the way down to ensuring that you create the battery value chain, right? It's no longer just a lithium value chain, it's a battery value chain. And so that is what we come up as saying the Africa Mining Vision speaks to the whole value chain more than just the issue of value addition, as well as just the issue of saying we want to process the minerals. We now start talking to industry. Industry requires power. For those who, I'm sure everyone within this group has had, in one way or the other, an interaction with the Ministry of Mines and Energy. That is the relationship between mining and electricity, adding value, requires a lot of electricity. Smelters, in particular, require a lot of electricity. But downstream value addition processes, factories, require 24-hour electricity. So when we are speaking to value addition, we're already speaking to the need to ensure that we optimize the efficiency of our power generation systems. So it then goes beyond just mining. You now start talking to the Ministry of, well, if it was Ministry of Mines and Energy, obviously the power generation part of the ministry ensures that they have to be efficient. Downstream, adding value to the minerals is now Ministry of Industry, right? Downstream beyond that, it's not just industry and it becomes industry and manufacturing. And when it comes to manufacturing, you're now diversifying. What are you manufacturing? It has to be a whole lot of things that you're manufacturing for a market. So you now also start creating the market for the goods that you're processing or you're manufacturing. It's a very simplified way of looking at things until it needs to be done. And that's where the Africa Mining Vision comes in. We work from a position of trying to coordinate all these processes, but coming from the position of the whole mining value chain is linked to all spatial development activities of an economy. And if done from regional economies perspectives, it starts making sense for financing, right? And then when it comes to a continental collaboration perspective, it means Africa can literally be a leader in its own right in serving its citizens first. We are not saying we are going to be selfish about it, but if you are coming from a village where everyone does not have power, and yet power lines are running through the village to go to a mining site, these are the things we're talking about. The communities will look at it and be angry, right? This is something that is very normal. It still happens to this very day. We have 600 million plus Africans that have no power, right? And yet, funny enough, we are being told we have all these resources that are going to be mined, and the mines require power, right? And yet we have 600 million people who do not have power. So the whole value chain then starts being aligned to it. And that's just the introduction to the Africa Mining Vision. Now, illicit financial flows and self-reliance in terms of financing. That's the very first part of the value chain, exploration, right? We are always told that, well, for those who are not aware of the mining industry, you always hear that the best way of ensuring that your mining industry develops is to bring in foreign direct investment. It is obviously from a skewed perspective of it not being a mistake, because back in the day, Africa was nothing but a raw material exporter. We're nothing but a raw material provider. So financing always had to come from beyond the continent. And as such, capital markets are beyond the continent are geared to ensure that they can support the extraction of minerals from Africa, but not necessarily add value. We are always told that issues of it's risky, the infrastructure is not there. Of course, the infrastructure is not going to be there. When financing institutions that are running the globe right now were created, not one African country was out of colonial shackles. So why would they have thought there was need to actually have a diversified industry and manufacturing capacity in a place that, for the lack of a better term, right, very politically incorrect, is with individuals who are not going to use the resources, right? That is how the global financial architecture has been crafted, has been maintained. We may try to sugarcoat it, but that's putting lipstick on a pig. However, we are not going to be complaining about it. And as such, the Africa Mining Vision ensures that we now create African financial institutional infrastructure to have African minerals development being managed by African financing. So we have what we call the African Mineral Resource and Energy Classification Framework that aligns to the Pan-African Resources Reporting Code. That is an instrument of the AMV that has been created by AMDC, and of course, not just AMDC and its partners, and the expertise that AMDC commands in terms of continental players. And with that, that's where you start saying, rather than seeking foreign direct investment, let us create financial instruments on the continent, right? Some already exist that are going to align to the minerals that exist. You collateralize the minerals on the continent for the benefit of ensuring that African financing and African capital actually starts supporting minerals development. On the continent, we do not have more than 20, I think, junior resource mining companies. Junior resource mining companies are the companies that are focused on exploration and eventually sell off a site that's been developed to the major mining companies, right? But those junior resource companies, how can I put it? They are lovely in being creative in getting financing for that exploration. All right. We always hear that exploration is our challenge. Exploration is what is the death of African mining, etc. But that is because exploration takes a lot of money. And for it to be de-risked, you need a third party who understands both mining and financing. And these are usually these junior resource companies. None of them are African. And so the ones that are on the continent are always going to be sourcing funding from shareholders beyond the continent. So the Pan-African Resources Reporting Code will align itself to the 28 to 30 African stock exchanges, such that financing for exploration comes from capital markets that are on the continent. Once we have that alignment of the resource being explored by African financing, then such things as illicit financial flows will be minimized, not necessarily cut down, but they will be minimized because shareholder value is now within African capital markets. More often than not, the reason why trade mispricing, misinvoicing, and all this has financing targeting going beyond the continent is because they're trying to ensure they maintain shareholder value. If you're going to be getting your financing from the Australian Stock Exchange, from the Toronto Stock Exchange, at some point, whether you like it or not, those shareholders out there are going to need their return on investment. And so sometimes we are calling it illicit financial flows, yes. But if you are the ones who are out there, right, and you are financing a project that is promising you a return on investment, you still need your investment. You can't be forced to say, because I've invested in you in Brazil, I'm here sitting in Freetown, I've invested in Brazil, the mine is doing well, so now I should start buying capital goods in Brazil for my benefit. No. I'm going to want to enjoy my life here in Sierra Leone because my investment was made from a position of having been in Sierra Leone, so the return on investment should come back to Sierra Leone. So we understand all this. Of course, we do not support illicit financial flows at the end of the day because we also realize that there's a nefarious nature of people ensuring or entities ensuring that their main job is extractivism, right? Regardless of where they are based. They may actually get some capital from the continent, but the intention is never to have the financing on the continent. But the start of it is to ensure at least we have financing mechanisms that are continental and targeting continental financing for the African mineral resources themselves. Once we are able to do that, which is something we're working towards with this AMREC Pact document, I'm sure we will share it with everyone. We then start minimizing things like illicit financial flows. And when it comes to all that, it also means the capital equipment, right? The manufacturing of capital equipment on the continent can start being managed for continental development, right? We have it's not a mistake that the countries that provide earth-moving equipment are also countries where these companies are the biggest manufacturing entities using mineral resources on the continent. Once you are able to actually do that trace, and it's a very simple one, right? You realize that capital markets actually determine how capital is going to move within the extractive sector. So let us control the capital markets on the continent and then ensure that they fund the financing on the continent, of minerals development on the continent. We're not saying it's going to be exclusive, but as long as we are ensuring that it is within continental shores from Tangier to Cape Town, right? This is where we are predominantly getting our financing from. Then it means the African mining vision starts being realized, because all other services that are aligned to minerals development start coming up within the continent. For the benefit of the issues of critical minerals, it means the manufacturing capacity on the continent starts being developed to ensure that we create not only the lithium-ion batteries, right, but we can also be downstream all the way to the vehicles themselves. They may not need to be four-wheeler vehicles. They can just as much be bicycles, two-wheelers or three-wheelers for the continent, because they are working within our continental needs, right? We can't be saying everyone wants to drive a Tesla for what reason, right? Or whatever vehicle they want to, whatever four-wheeled vehicle that costs 70, 80,000, when we can make electric bicycles that go at 2/3 the speed of a car for less than 10% of the value of a four-wheeled vehicle. So these are all the things that are aligned in terms of how we work within the African Minerals Development Center. Our work is centered around ensuring that that Africa Mining Vision is achieved in a practical manner. This, like I said, is coming from a position of ensuring that when I'm speaking like this, it aligns to the leaders who are within the audience, and I'm trying to make it as simplified as possible to ensure that when it comes to us working together, everyone is needed within ensuring that we attain the Africa Mining Vision. Civil society, private sector, government, philanthropies, we are all needed, but we have to come from a very intentional position of trying to achieve development via the Africa Mining Vision. I think that is what I'll have as my initial introduction to the scenario.
Yeah.
I'm hoping it made sense, but if not, I'm very willing to try and clarify even further.
No, you did very well. It did make a lot of sense. Thank you, Mkululi, especially when you mentioned the point of the Africa Mining Vision. Of course, because one of the questions that have been lingering around was that since the major attraction of most of those, global north countries to Africa is minerals. Those countries that come here have visions of 100 years. For example, we're told China has a 100-year vision for Africa. Does Africa have even a 1-day vision for China, or to counteract that? And so when we hear things such as the Africa Mining Vision, we get reassured. When we hear that, there's recognition of what the gaps are. For example, when you mention the lack of junior resource mining companies, which we want to double down on and ensure that we have those created, of course, we get to be reassured. Let me turn to Chennai. Chennai, you work with the Tax Justice Network of Africa. And of course, we are also curious, as Kululi was sharing, we were wondering whether those multinationals that have specialized in, that have the capital and have monopolized, the trade in minerals, whether they even pay tax, and whether this could be one other area for illicit financial flows. So let's hear from you, Chennai. Chennai, you will have your say. You will have maximum 20 minutes to make your submission especially also building up and plugging some of what you think are the gaps on what Kululi has shared. Over to you, Chennai, to have your submission.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Very well, very well. You are, loud and clear.
Great, thank you. First of all, a huge thank you to the Civic Advisory Hub for the invitation. This is such an important topic, not a new topic, but I think drawing from what Mkululi said, the current geopolitics has really made this conversation much more urgent, and really has asked us to bring to the fore some of these discussions that we've been having for quite some time. So a huge thank you for the invitation to speak on this. As was mentioned, my name is Chennai Mukumba. I serve as the Executive Director at Tax Justice Network Africa. Our primary focus of work is what you've just alluded to now. How can we enhance domestic resource mobilization on the continent? Much more specifically, how can we make it such that our economic development is in our hands, right? And being determined by the use of wealth that's being generated within our own borders. One of the comments that you made right at the beginning is that we have this, honestly, it's quite a disappointing paradox on our continent. We have this incredible wealth, yet for some reason, we also have some of the highest poverty statistics. And how do we deal with this gap, right? What are some of the conversations we need to have about addressing this situation so that our resources work for us? Institutions such as the AMDC are doing incredible work to really push us in this direction, but there's still quite a lot of work that needs to be done. So what I'm going to do is, I hope you don't mind, I have a presentation that I'm going to make over the next 20 minutes. And I think in terms of order, I'm really glad that Muku went first, because he gave us a fantastic overview and oversight of the current status of our resources on the continent. And I love the fact that he made mention to the fact that when he was talking about the resources, he wasn't just talking about mineral resources, right? We have a significant number of diverse resources on the continent. And so this is what we should be talking about, all of those resources working in tandem. And so my presentation is going to focus specifically on how to take advantage of those resources. I'm going to be asking the tax question, and I'm going to be looking at how it is that we seem to be losing resources from the sector. So I did already talk to your colleagues. I'm hoping that I have the ability to share. It looks like I do. So when I see my screen, I'm going to assume that you see my screen as well, and I'm going to start presenting. But if you don't see it, please
Yes,
just
it's visible. It's visible. Proceed, Chennai.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so my presentation is largely on the taxation of the natural resource sector in Africa. As an institution, as I mentioned earlier, we really focus on how to enhance domestic resource mobilization. We are a civil society organization, the only civil society organization actually that focuses primarily on this topic of taxation, because we think it's such an important one. And we see taxation as one of the levers that is crucial to help us meet our developmental objectives. The other day, we were having a conversation with some colleagues about our Africa Agenda 2063. And within that document, it actually states that between 70 to 90% of the attainment of our development objectives must come from domestic resource mobilization. And the mineral sector is one of the key sectors that can help us do that. So this is just a very brief outline of my presentation. I'll begin with some introduction, some facts and an introduction, where I'll give some facts and numbers, and then I'll go into challenges of taxation in Africa's natural resource sector. After that, I'll have a brief look at what rethinking taxation of Africa's natural resource sector looks like, and then I'll conclude with looking ahead, opportunities for reform. So, introduction and background. We always like to start with this presentation at TJNA, because we feel it really gives an overview of just what the natural resource space looks like on the continent. As you can see here, we have a great diversity of natural resources, particularly when you look at other regions, right? We have gold, we have uranium, we have coltan, we have iron, and we really just use this to show just how much potential we have to take advantage of this sector if we really get our affairs in order, right? Which is one side of the equation. And then the other, if we're able to make sure that the people that are coming into our continent to make use of these resources aren't exploiting, right? In the same way that Mukululi just referred to. But really the point here is just to show the wealth that exists within the continent, and what this could mean for us if we were to take it in the right direction. So why does tax and the extractive industry sector discussion matter, right? First and foremost, it contributes to the domestic resource mobilization conversation. So without using too much jargon, when talking about domestic resource mobilization, we're talking about our own inherent ability to raise resources based off of the resources that we have within our continent, right? And this sector really has the potential to play a significant role as a contributor to raising these resources, these financial resources specifically. Secondly, this conversation matters because the extractive industry sector is a major economic activity in a number of our countries, right? And a significant domestic export earner for many of our economies. 62% of total exports in sub-Saharan Africa are from the extractive sector, right? So it's an important piece of our economy. And so we need to be thinking about how to really harness the potential that exists there. And then thirdly, the extractive industry sector has a big influence on our rates of economic growth, as well as the amount of tax revenue that our governments are collecting, right? And so these are some of the reasons we see the intersection between tax and the extractive industry sector as a very important one. Now, this graph just shows you a little bit of how the mining sector specifically contributes to tax revenues. So on the left, we've got the Republic of Congo there, where you can see that the mining sector contributes to almost 35% of the government's revenues, right? So almost a third of the government's revenues are coming from this sector in the Republic of Congo. All the way to the right, where we can see Tanzania there, where the mining sector is contributing just under 2.5% there. So the mining sector contribution to tax revenues varies, but in a number of our countries plays a significant role, right? And which is why we need to be thinking about this conversation and why platforms such as the one you've just created for us are important. Secondly, let's look at some of the numbers now on illicit financial flows and the EI sector. So I've been talking a lot about the potential, about the revenue contribution. However, a lot of that is being eroded by what we call illicit financial flows. And this is what Muku mentioned in his presentation. Illicit financial flows, just very quickly, are the resources that we are losing from our continent. And these resources take up three different characteristics. Number one, the most important way that we're losing resources that are eroding our tax bases from the continent is through tax abusive behavior that's being undertaken by multinational corporations, right? And 65% of the amounts of 65% of illicit financial flows from Africa are really due to the activity and behavior of multinational corporations. The other 35% can be divided into two other categories. The first is due to corrupt behavior within the continent, and then thirdly, due to illegal activity. So you're looking at, for example, money that we're losing as a result of drug trafficking or human trafficking, etc. But one of the things that we always find really shocks people is when they realize that most of the money, 2/3 of the illicit financial flows that we're losing from the continent, is due to the behavior of multinationals on this continent. Now, the 2020 UNCTAD report on illicit financial flows indicated that we are losing close to $89 billion annually on illicit financial flows. Now, to put that into context, a number of our countries, for example, have debt burdens, right, that they are currently in very serious negotiations with the IMF to address. And when you look at those numbers, you're looking at figures between $5, $10, $12 billion, right? These are numbers that are debilitating our governments. Now, contrast that to the amount of money that we're losing annually, right? I hope that shows from a numbers perspective what that means in terms of our developmental objectives. Now, the same report also found that IFFs linked to the export of primary extractive resources were estimated to be as high as $40 billion, right, in 2015. And then in 2020, indicated that we're looking at close to $278 billion. And so there's a trend, right, in terms of the amount of monies that we're losing. And significantly, when you think about how much we're losing from illicit financial flows, most of this is actually coming from this particular sector. So, I mean, at TGNA, we have a number of key result areas that we focus on when we're looking at tax, but very specifically, we have an area of work that just focuses on taxation of natural resources, because as a sector, it's contributing close to 50% of the amount of monies that we're losing from illicit financial flows. Now, why is that, right? Why is the mining sector contributing so much to our illicit financial flows? The reason for it is because illicit financial flows tend to be concentrated in high value, low weight commodities, right? And so specifically here, we're looking at gold, diamonds, and other precious minerals, right? And so of the estimated $40 billion of illicit financial flows that are derived from extractive commodities, 77% of these were actually concentrated in the gold supply chain, right? Followed by diamonds, which was about 12%, and then platinum and 6%. So to put this into context again, we're losing about $90 billion annually from illicit financial flows, specifically, primarily from the behavior multinational corporations. Of the 90 billion, 40 billion of that is coming from the extractive commodities, And of that, the high value, low weight commodities constitute the bulk, right? With the gold supply chain being the majority. Now, what do some of these international institutions have to say on tax avoidance, right? In 2021, the International Monetary Fund put out a publication entitled Tax Avoidance in Sub-Saharan Africa's Mining Sector, right? And it indicated as well that countries are losing between 470 million to 730 billion per year in corporate income tax, right? I say corporate income tax because that's a component of illicit financial flows. Over and above tax avoidance, as well as other tax abusive behaviors by multinational corporations. Now, these figures, right, are representations of schools that haven't been built, hospitals that don't have sufficient medicines, and an insufficient water supply, right, that we have on the continent. This money that we're losing can be very directly linked to resources that we don't have on the continent for us to really help us move forward, right, when thinking about the direction we want to go as far as industrialization is concerned. So now, what are some of the challenges of taxation in Africa's natural resources? Now, this I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because Mkhululi really, I think went into detail on this. But one of the significant challenges of the sector is that we're seeing a dominance of foreign multinationals operating with companies that are responsible for close to all the exploration and most of the production, right? And as a result, what that means is that that sector is highly vulnerable and highly prone, right, to potentially abuses by various companies. And I've just put an example here of some of the companies that have seen some issues on the continent. Now, I've spoken a lot about the way in which some of these external factors are contributing to illicit financial flows. But it's important for us to also, be introspective, from the perspective of what can we do, what are we doing as well, right, on our side that's contributing to this scourge. So first and foremost, one of the things we found is that there at times can be an unrealistic expectation by governments, right? And sometimes a limited understanding of the long-term nature of the resource sector, right? In terms of profit realization. We found that at times governments are entering into contracts with these companies and don't have a full understanding of what that investment means from a long-term perspective, specifically from the perspective of realization of profit. Another thing that we found that many governments don't actually know, I mean, you recall that first map I showed you that indicates what minerals are where. But many governments actually don't know the value of the resources that's underground. And so we've got a situation of inadequate geological information in terms of knowing the value of resources in the resource sector, which undermines our ability, therefore, to then subsequently tax it correctly. And then another thing that we found is that at times we're going into these contracts and they're not designed in a way that's favorable towards us, right? Or we're negotiating fiscal terms that really sort of don't allow us to fully benefit from the sector, right? And then we've found in some countries, governments can be overly generous in terms of tax incentives, and then find themselves locked in fiscal stabilization, or can find themselves locked in fiscal stabilization clauses. And these are all certain challenges we found also exist from our side. Another challenge that we found is that many of our governments have an over-reliance on profit-based taxes, which tend to be prone to corporate tax abuse. We have often an inadequate administrative capacity within our revenue authorities to administer and implement at times some of the fiscal regimes that are required to help us address this tax abusive behavior. And then lastly, one of the things we found is within this sector, we often find ourselves on the back end, right? We are price takers with regards to minerals. And so whenever there's a volatility within the market, for example, during COVID or even just general prices, this has very big effects on our side. And so this is just a different depiction, really, of what I've just said earlier, right? We need to think through how to strengthen our policies, right? We need to think through how to make sure that our policies are not being politically influenced, right? And that they're really being based on data, so that we've got results that most benefit our countries themselves. And then lastly, at times we found that some of these contracts that are being signed between multinational corporations and our governments tend to be done in secret, right? And because of that, it's very difficult to then hold to account. And then you know what they say about things that are done in secret, very limited transparency and subsequently very limited accountability. So what do we need to do in terms of rethinking our natural resource sector? Just give me a minute. Okay, I can see I've got about 2 minutes left. We need our governments to be clear, right, on their extractive industries objectives, right? We need to make sure that there's alignment between our national development plans and priorities, as well as the objective of our extractive industries. And clear objectives often will then result in well-designed fiscal regimes, right? What can we do to set up sovereign wealth funds, mineral development funds, mineral revenue sharing, right? The other thing is that we need to put in place fiscal regimes that build, right, in the elements of predictability, stability, and flexibility from the onset, right? When thinking about these extractive projects, we need to think about putting in place flexibility in our fiscal regimes. And then lastly, we need to resist giving overly generous tax incentives to a number of these multinational corporations when they come into our borders. We need to be thinking through how to adopt more homegrown models and solutions to our extractive industry sector. We need to really domesticate frameworks such as the Africa Mining Vision that Mkhululi walked us through, right? Because we already have essentially documentation that can help us take advantage of our sector, but you'll find that the domestication and the uptake of this has limited, which is really sort of undermining our abilities. I'm going to skip the next 2 points just because I can see that we're a little bit tight on time. This particular slide really shows the fact that we also need to see how we can build better linkages, right, across the entire value chain to also see how we're able to, number one, benefit from a domestic resource mobilization perspective, but then also be able to bring in particularly those individuals such as women, right, that are participating at the local level within the industry. And then as I conclude, what are some of the opportunities for reform, right? First and foremost, poor governance and ineffective taxation are very closely linked, right? And so we need to see how we can improve our governance from the sector, because that's really one of the first steps of then helping curb this issue of corporate abuse within the sector. Within the high-level panel report that was released in 2015, one of the things that they indicated was that whilst there is a significant amount of money that we're losing from the behavior of corporates, one of the enablers, right, is our governance, is the governance question, which we need to look at. We need to see how to enhance openness and transparency within this sector. So contract disclosure, beneficial ownership registries, who truly owns these mines, where is the money going, etc., is really important. And there's initiatives such as the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative that exists to help us do that. We need to start thinking about what the energy transition means, right? Because there's, in a sense, a second gold rush for the minerals that exist on our continent. And how can we ensure that this time, as a result of this rush, we don't find ourselves essentially seeing a second version of the resource curse, right? So we don't find ourselves being where the continent where the wealth exists, but we're not able to take advantage of that. And then lastly, we need to cautiously explore increased participation of our own state-owned enterprises or domestic private sector within the EI sector. And this is so important because the potential that exists within the sector can really help us meet so many of our developmental objectives, right? And essentially translate into public service delivery for our people, right? This looks like health, education, and agriculture. And then lastly, when thinking about the sector, we need to remember that extractive resources are finite and non-renewable, right? And so at some point, these resources will deplete, right? And after that, what will countries such as Mozambique and the Africa continent at large have to show for these resources once they're depleted or finished? So a huge thank you again for the opportunity to make a presentation. I will conclude there and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chennai. Of course, that was quite deep, and you brought up quite a number of things. One of the most outstanding points you made was the point on behavior of multinational companies whose ultimate aim is to maximize profit, and so they engage in acts of tax avoidance and many of those. And when you look at the context in which this is achieved, you see that there are quite a number of enablers and accomplices because they don't operate in a vacuum. And of course, when we speak about multinational companies who come in with big capital, then they are able to use that money to buy political influence. And so there are issues of captivity of the systems and ensuring that the leaders we have on top are not serving our interests, but are serving the interests of the benefactors that may have gone a long way in also financing their campaign, election campaigns. And so the question before I open up, because we are now on the hour mark, before I open up to the audience, the question I wanted to hear, to ask you and hear your sense of what we can do as leaders of NGOs and civil society. What then do we do? What role can we play in situations where the leadership we have on top in our governments is hesitant to make sure that the changes happen, because they are also benefiting from it? And I would imagine that some of these the proceeds from these shenanigans come back to finance politics and their survival. So what role then do we play as citizens who are leading civil society organizations and NGOs? And I would want to hear your sense of what can be done. This question comes to you, but also goes to Mkululi. What can we do as NGO leaders? Because what can we do differently, actually, differently this time around to effect change? Over to you.
Thank you so much. I think for me, I don't know so much that there's anything that we need to do differently. I think civil society has been and continues to play a big role in holding our governments to account, because that's such an important component of ensuring, like you've just mentioned earlier, that we're able to take advantage collectively, right, of the resources that we have. So if anything, I think as civil society, we really need to double down on the work that we've been doing. I think there's much more of an urgency now. And so as a result, we need to be more courageous. We need to be more bold in the work that we're doing. I think civil society over the years has really shown the importance of having this particular sector really ensure that we're able to meet our developmental objectives, either through at times, providing sort of services that the government is not holding, but much more importantly, ensuring that the government is actually holding true to the promises and commitments that they've made. I think the point that you alluded to right at the beginning, right, that there are certain leaders that are benefiting from the current broken system exists, right? And I think that's where you now need to see the civil society playing a pressure point. And one of the big ways that we found civil society can do this is by raising the awareness of the general public of the current state of affairs, and essentially almost generating a demand for transparency and accountability, so that then our leaders are forced to then work in a way that's beneficial to all of us.
Thank you, Mkululi. You're muted, bro.
I apologize. I was saying, just like Chennai has said, let's not let up on the way that transparency demands have been coming. Maybe just be a bit more innovative about it. As well as when it comes to the natural resources sector or the extractive sector. The way of doing things differently is to keep understanding the nuances of the sector, right? I'll just give you an example of, I mean, in line with this issue of keeping in tandem with the sector. There is now, hydrogen is hydrogen, right? Depending on how you get it or how you have it harnessed, there is now green hydrogen and there's now gray hydrogen. But hydrogen is hydrogen. Now, depending on how creative you are with your accounting, right, you can ensure that as a person who's creating green hydrogen, your taxation under issues of climate obligations becomes zero, right? And those that are doing gray hydrogen, in quotes, will continue being hit by industry standards of ensuring that they pay their taxes and all that. We should not underestimate the nefarious nature of non-continental do-gooders. As civil society, let's keep track of some of these things. This issue of just transition, right? We had civic leaders on the continent running, chanting just transition. Governments should follow issues of just transition. Come the Ukraine war, how just was that transition and how quick was it when a certain country that was supporting civil society leaders on the continent to chant and cry for just transition issues went back to call, actually got the call from the African countries where they were supporting civil society to not support coal production in the country. And yet when the tables turned, those same countries were the ones that ensured that just transition was put aside and the coal was going back to them. So keeping in tandem with the nuances of the sector, in my opinion, will ensure that the transparency calls, the requests for ensuring that we minimize these illicit financial flows. I just gave you an example of green hydrogen. No one on the continent will ever challenge a green hydrogen project in terms of taxes, because globally, this is where everyone wants to go, right? But you will understand that the players along the value chain are getting into this sector, not necessarily for the altruistic nature of saving the environment. They're ensuring that their profits remain as high as possible. So keeping in tandem with developments on the continent for the continent. This is the other thing. And that's why I will always say the Africa Mining Vision is our Bible, as it were. Yes, it is undergoing some form of update right now, but the tenets remain the same. As civil society, let us ensure that, yes, we're crying for transparency. Yes, we're crying for minimization of corruption and all that. But let us do it for the purposes of benefiting the continent. and not necessarily falling into the traps of perpetuating without knowing the systems that we are trying to currently curtail for the purposes of Africa's benefit. Yeah, that's it for now.
Thank you very much, Mkululi. So for the benefit of the audience joining us there, you can actually participate, because at this point, I would like to open it up for the audience to ask your questions. And there are two ways you can do this. One of the ways is by raising your hand. When you raise your hand, we'll be able to pick you up and give you rights to speak. Or if you can't do that, you can also participate by, submitting your question through the chat room. We will have it read and addressed to the respective panelists to answer, provided that when you ask the question in the chat room, if you could please identify who of the two panelists you would want to respond to the question. So if you, I'm opening up now, if anyone in the audience would like to submit, raise your hand and we shall give you rights to speak and ask your question, as long as you keep it short, simple, and succinct. Your questions now? So let's look for hands. So I have a hand, actually two hands. Now I need to be guided because I should be able to see who are these. Okay, so Sabino, let's have a hand from Sabino, followed by Bakwalikira, yeah. Sabino first. Ask your question. Have you say, Sabino? Unmute and ask the question. Maybe Sabino is not ready. Can we go to Bakali Quira? Philip?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Henry and the team. The first question goes to Chube. In terms of natural resources capital accounting in Africa, how prepared are we? Because if we are still crippling with the natural resources capital accounting, then we cannot negotiate better for financing. Then to my sister, Chunei, I get worried, 89 billions lost annually. It's a big issue. And how do we ensure that multilateral systems work? Because in Africa, I think in the natural resources sector, issues of multilateral systems are not working. And as leaders of non-state actors, how do we ensure that these multilateral systems work? Because even in the biggest spaces, for example, at the UNFCCC, in the Conference of Parties, the African group of negotiators are still grappling with this kind of thing to ensure that what we agree on in the sector works. So how would we practically ensure that multilateral systems work? I thank you.
Thank you, Sabino Caseno. You have two hands. You have rights to only one. So you unmute and fire your question.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Correct. Loud and clear.
All right, thank you. It's Nelson. I'm actually using Sabino's laptop now to speak. That's why we managed to open through. And thank you, Chennai, and thank you, Mkululu. It was a great presentation. My concern is related to the AMV, because we have been speaking a lot on the AMV. And so far, much of it hasn't been adopted either by our government, and most of us within the community are really facing lots of problems. So my question is, what exactly is the AMV or the African mining or the African platform is doing exactly so that our governments can adopt that and reinforce its implementation? Because it seems like a great instrument, but we are not making use of it to the best. Therefore, we are still seeing a lot of disgraces, a lot of issues happening to our communities. So what exactly can be done within the African Union to reinforce this document, as most of our governments have ratified that. Thank you. My name is Nelson and I'm from Angola. Thank you.
All right, so let's, we have questions in the chat room, but some of them were submitted by a Francophone speaker. We are having those questions transcribed into English, and then I will address them, bring them to the attention of the panelists. But for now, the panelists, if you can respond to those two, questions, then I will proceed afterwards.
Do I start or can I start?
The choice is yours. You can start.
All right, let's start, Chennai. So natural resources capital accounting. So this framework I just mentioned, which I'm sure very few civil society leaders are engaging in understanding, the African Minerals and Energy Resource Classification Framework, right, can be seen as the nuanced way of dealing with natural resource capital accounting when it comes to minerals and energy resources, right? That's just one way of dealing with it. The fact that it is aligning to the AMV in itself, right, becomes a nuanced way, based on what I said earlier, of engaging with the AMV. The joy of civil society is you can engage in research. You definitely have access to the AMDC, and with that research, you then understand there are new ways of dealing with capital resource accounting. I mean, natural resource capital accounting of African mineral resources, without thinking entirely of how the rest of the multilateral systems are going to deal with it. The reason why the failures or why we are grappling with it is because it's a system that is intertwined with the status quo, right? AMREC is actually trying to break some of the status quo. We're going to need to work with African financing institutions in the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to need civil society to actually start speaking and highlighting issues of how we can do things differently, rather than thinking the multilateral system is continuously going to work for us. Yes, it will work for us only if we are charting our own destinies, right? That is my response to the issue of financing, because AMREC Park, like I said in my presentation, will definitely be aligning to, first and foremost, the capital market structures on the continent and security exchanges on the continent. I hope that helps, but of course I can go deeper if we need to go to do our tete-a-tete. And then Nelson, government adoption, you'll be surprised to learn that governments thought that just by signing, or just by the heads of state signing onto the document in 2009, governments thought they have ratified it. Actually, we actually have a ratification instrument of ensuring that the AMDC, which is the implementing agency, becomes a fully fledged specialized agency, where it can then start speaking as Africa's voice fully. Because right now, when we want to speak, we definitely have to go under the African Union Commission's leadership, right? Which is still okay even when we are fully ratified. But the point is, we do not have a certain powered mandate because we are not yet fully ratified. We have 4 ratifications on the continent. And Nelson, here you can help us. Angola is not one of the countries that is ratified. The 4 countries that have ratified the AMDC statutes are Nigeria, Zambia, Guinea, and Mali. As civil society, you can actually push, Nelson, for Angola to do so, and you'll start understanding some of the benefits of ensuring that your government, having ratified, will start dealing with ensuring that the AMV is implemented on the ground, practically, with the help of civil society in itself. So these are my 2 responses. Thank you.
Chennai?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll start off with where Mukululi ended. I really think as civil society, we should be much more actively supporting this process of ratification of the Africa Mining Vision. I think there's, been subsequent documents that really facilitate this adoption that have been released since. And to your earlier point, right at the beginning, this is where civil society can come to play. It really is a blueprint document that went through such a thorough process of development that included civil society, that I think we should be actively thinking about implementing on the continent in light of the current conversations that are happening now. So just wanted to quickly comment on that. So I think there was 2 questions I was asked to speak to. The first was on multilateralism. Again, I completely agree with Mukululi. We need to see how to make it work for us. Unfortunately, our current multilateral system was developed at a time when global South countries and African countries particularly were not number one in existence, and so subsequently couldn't be at the table. And as a result, what that's meant is that we have an international financial architecture that doesn't work for us. And this has been said severally at different levels, including all the way up to the Secretary General, who's indicated that, we need a time for reform. So, I mean, I can tell you now within the global tax world, there's a conversation that's being spearheaded by Africa, actually, to see how we can reform the global tax system. Because, number one, I mentioned we weren't at the table when it was being developed. And so because of that, there's an inherent bias that exists towards developed countries, capital exporting countries. But also, secondly, the current global tax system is one of the things that's actually perpetuating our illicit financial flows, some of the gaps that the multinational corporations I was making reference to earlier actually exist, right, within the international arena, right? And it's these gaps that the multinational corporations are able to take advantage in order to shift their revenues and their profits. And so I think that's just a quick question on multilateralism. We need to see how we can contribute to its reform so that it works for us. And I think the way that we're going to do that is by recognizing and acknowledging our own power as a continent. One of the things that I've been thinking about lately is that, we tend to say that as a region, we're at the bottom of the value chain. And I think we need to rethink that phrasing. I think more than anything, we're not at the bottom of the value chain, rather we're at the beginning of the value chain. There is no value chain unless as a continent, as a region, we exist. And that gives us an amount of power that I really think our leaders, whenever they're in negotiation spaces, they really need to adopt as a posture. My second comment, we are losing way too much money on an annual basis. There's absolutely no good reason why we're losing close to $90 billion on an annual basis. That amount exceeds the overseas development assistance we receive as a continent. It also exceeds the amount of private sector investment that's coming into this continent. What it actually means is that we are subsequently a net exporter of resources. This idea of us being a begging bowl continent is really, really unnecessary, because if we were able to keep just within our borders our own resources, there would be no reason for us to find ourselves at all of these other conferences where they're organizing, 10, 100-year plans for the continent. And so we really need to figure that out. And so subsequently, what we need to do is think about the various national reforms that we need to take. And the Africa Mining Vision is a really good document for us to start implementing, and then subsequently seeing what we need to do to address the gaps that we have at national level. And then secondly, be actively participating in global level conversations. Because if we don't, it doesn't matter how great our national level efforts are, they'll be wholly undermined by what's happening at the international level, right? So, for example, one of the things that I was saying to a colleague the other day is that many of these resources, many of these illicit financial flows that leave our continent, go and find their home in an OECD country, right? And so we also now need to be holding to account many of these rich countries that essentially are the homes of the resources that are leaving our continent. Thank you very much. I think I'm happy to end there.
Yeah, thank you very much. So there are quite a number of questions that came through the chat room, and I'm going to read them. But as I go into the chat room, some of them we have already translated, those that were in French. But this one is from me. There is an old man in Kampala who has said that for him, his policy is to make sure that no mineral leaves the country unprocessed. I would want you to weigh in on that one, but let me go to the questions. The questions that were in the chat room, these came from Ringo. Quite a long list of them. Let me read. Either of you will pick them. So the question, well, the first question was, what regional tax cooperation avenues can be used to avoid capital flight between African countries? And then the other question is, what regional collaborative tools should be developed to improve transparency and traceability? And then the third one is, what concrete mechanisms can states adopt to trace flows from both artisanal and industrial extractive sectors? And then the other question is, how can we combat illegal exploitation in areas controlled by armed groups? That's an important one. And then the other one is, what tax obligations and sanctions should be imposed on foreign companies operating in Africa? And then the other one is, how can donors sustainably support local CSOs in their mission of citizen oversight? And lastly, what kind of regional tax cooperation can help prevent capital flight between the African countries? But I think I've said that one. But let me also read. There are a couple of other ones that have come in. This one has come in from Benson Ikwe Ochen. He says that most African countries find it easier to sign into the instrument, but ratification seems to be a big challenge. Many examples exist. For instance, the ACDEG, I think the African Convention on Democracy, Elections and Governance. I see that as CSO leaders, we must push hard for ratification, but need to revisit our strategies to achieve results. So those are some of the comments and questions coming through from the chat room. Let me leave it to you, either of you panelists, to pick which ones you please to respond to. And so that we proceed, because we're also running out of time. We should be winding up in the next 5 minutes or so. Over to you, panelists, to pick up any that you want to respond to the questions.
Yeah, maybe I can give a first shot this time.
Yeah.
So I'll leave the regional cooperation questions to Mkluli. I think he's best placed to respond to those. And I'll just speak to, I think there were two that were very CSO specific. So the first one was, I think, just around sustainable support for civil society organizations. I think that the best type of funding that we have found that really leaves us nimble and flexible in our work is funding that's not tied to projects, and rather can be termed as core funding that's flexible. And the reason I say this is because we're living in such a changing and sort of shape-shifting world. And so civil society really needs to be able to respond very quickly, I think, to various issues that arise. And so I think if there are any sort of partners that are on the call, I think that's the best type of support for civil societies. And then I think that, secondly, like I said, I won't talk to regional cooperation, but I think our role here is indeed, as was indicated, let's push for the ratification and subsequent implementation of the AMV. And then our role as civil society is then to play the watchdog function, right? To make sure that the commitments that our governments have signed up to are actually being adhered to. So thanks, Henry. I'll conclude there.
Right, thank you. I will take up from where you're coming from, Chennai. And for sure, the issue is some of these questions I actually responded to by implementing the AMV. As Chennai mentioned, it was a very comprehensive piece of work when it was done back in 2008 and adopted in 2009. Civil society was extremely involved in it. And so it has a watchdog implementation structure. We have what we call the African Minerals Governance Framework, right, as one of the tools of implementing the AMV. Once we have all countries understanding the Africa mining vision. The issues of an African tax administration regional structure, right? The ones that already exist, for instance, they would then be easier in terms of working together and harmonizing their tax policies, especially when it comes to corporate income tax for multinationals that are in the solid mineral sector. Right? That's one way of looking at the regional tax cooperation angle and ensuring that we are not focusing on it from a siloed mentality. The issue is also the issue of looking at things in a siloed mentality. Once we do not understand the linkages between all parts of the value chain, we will always miss the boat because, like I said, the term creative accounting is very deceptive, right? It's basically putting a flip to nefarious activity, right? What you call it, specialized economic zones, for instance, right? Usually, back in the day, they were export processing zones. If you look at how multinationals can actually tell you they want to manufacture in country but want the support of export processing zones or special economic zones, you will think they are working for you, but 4 or 5 years down the line, you realize it's always been a tax avoidance issue or a tax abusive structure on working within a country. But if you look at it from the whole mining value chain perspective, here I'll just speak to the mining value chain, right? There won't be any loops that are easily taken advantage of, right? And this is where that I don't know how else to put it without remaining simplified to say, let us focus on ensuring that the AMV as civil society is taken upon seriously by member states and ratified in terms of the AMDC statutes. The issue of armed groups, well, that's also a difficult scenario because it now goes beyond just mineral governance. That just gets into governance as a whole. And as civil society, I'm sure you know, if we're in another forum, I would say you are baiting me to get into a scenario that I can't be able to fully respond to. The artisanal mining sector, in terms of the traceability issues, that is something we're working on as AMDC right now. Hopefully by end of this year, we will have an artisanal and small-scale mining continental strategy that will address issues of traceability. And yeah, I think that is it for now in terms of seeming like it's a blanket response to most of the questions asked. But for me, the way I could answer all the ones that were directly related to the AMV, let us keep track of the nuances that the AMV is highlighting now and always have an idea of what the AMV is and the new tools and instruments that are coming out in alignment with implementing the AMV. So that is all I can say for now, considering that time is done for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mkululi. Thank you very much, Chenai. You have been quite wonderful panelists. The insights you have shared with us have really deepened our understanding of this and perhaps also generated our interest. Because like you said, Mkululi, your advice was that as leaders and practitioners in the NGO sector, all we have to do is to always get nuanced into the sector to understand better because it is so dynamic. Before I invite the head of programs, chief of programs at the Civic Advisory Hub to close this, allow me to thank the participants. You've been, the audience, you've been quite a wonderful audience as well. Those questions that you have asked have been critical, but also those that did not have a chance to ask, there will be a second time. Let me take my own, express my own gratitude to Civic Advisory Hub for taking leadership on this matter. This is a matter, if you agree with me, that we need to dedicate much time to, we need to pick interest in and keep dialoguing and exchanging views over, because certainly we cannot leave matters Africa to leaders only. We in our own sector as NGO, civil society actors, we need to take leadership. on some of these. And we can only do so if we keep refreshing and recharging our batteries, but also filling up our buckets to make sure that we can speak from a point of information. You've been quite insightful. So allow me now to hand over to the organizers. Thank you for this for your leadership. I hand over to you. Is it Hilda now? For closing remarks. It's been quite an insightful session for me and the rest of the panelists. Over to you, Hilda.
Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you. It's been an insightful session, I think, for all of us who've attended the webinar. And thank you very much for moderating the webinar. Thank you, Mr. Mukululi and Ms. Chinai Mukumba, for leading on this topic and sharing with us your expertise as members of the civil society in Africa, mainly in attendance. From all the participants and all of us at Civic Advisory Hub, we are deeply grateful and we appreciate the opportunity to engage in such valuable discussions with you. We are thrilled to have you join our monthly TLT sessions. As Yona mentioned earlier on, these are sessions that run on a monthly basis on various topics, bringing in different leaders and subject experts on matters that affect the civil society within the continent of Africa. So we are more than grateful to have you attend this webinar. It's quite clear in the conversations and in the discussions that we are losing a lot of funds to illicit financial flows within the African natural resources and the taxes. And from the discussions, there are so many key takeaways that have been shared, and I hope and trust that members of the civil society have taken note and we will act on them in our different capacities. Capacities like raising awareness on the different issues that affect the African natural justice section, the land and environmental defenders, and demanding for accountability, being watchdogs to the state actors, taking part in the global platforms that hold some of these conversations. So I hope as members of the civil society, this is something that we are willing and ready to engage in. So just to let you know, all of our TLT series can be found on the YouTube. We started running the TLT series in February this year, and so far all can be found on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to stay updated on our programs and our TLT engagements. Finally, I would like to thank the entire team at Civic Advisory Hub, Yona, Arnold, Julie, and Sharon. Thank you for your hard work in ensuring our webinars run smoothly each month. We look forward to seeing you again next month for our next topic. Stay tuned. We'll be posting them on our social media. Bye. Do we need a group photo?
It's up to you.
Yeah, that's your call.
Julie.
Yes,
All right.
can we have all even the panelists, please, if they can, just go on camera for a little bit, then we can have a group photo, if you don't mind.
I think our cameras are on. Happy for you to take the photo.
Yeah, we're all on.
Cameras are running. Let us know when you are done.
Done.
Are you done, Julie?
Yes, we are. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, the participants. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Kululi. Thank you, Chinai. See you all again.
Thank you. See
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.